Ms. Smith, in 2020, the federal government banned 1,500 different firearms. Some of these were regular hunting rifles and sporting rifles that sometimes had carbonite stocks on them that made them look scary. Also on the list were items that I had assumed were legal, like German Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets and Russian anti-aircraft missiles. I suppose I missed out while I could. More recently, the federal government has promised to ban the sale, gifting, or transfer of all handguns in Canada. What would you do as Premier to defend the right of firearms owners from the federal government?
Yeah, I began by talking about this and the role that we can play with our Chief Firearms Officer. One of the things that she mentioned is that we already do the regulation on our shops that sell guns. And we also do sort of the higher order of gun licensing for those who need to have a second check. But most of our routine firearms licenses, they get processed in Miramichi. And it's taking not just months, it's taking years to do. I think the federal government is trying to encourage people not to get firearms. If we repatriate that act and we end up doing all of the administration here, it gives us more control over making sure that people who are law-abiding get their firearms. And then when we have an Alberta Provincial Police and the federal government says that they're going to start confiscating firearms, we can say, actually, we have different policing priorities. Our policing priorities is to make sure that those who live in rural communities do not have people going onto their property and stealing their stuff without it being taken care of. That's what our policing priority should be, but we can only do that if we take control.
Mr. Taves, while you served in cabinet, your government was the first in Canada to appoint its own Chief Firearms Officer. What further steps would you take as Premier to defend the right of firearms owners if you are Premier?
Yeah, number one, we need to work with other like-minded provinces to push back on egregious federal laws and restrictions that limit the freedom of law-abiding gun owners right across the country. Look, we did appoint a CFO, and I was at a gun range here in Calgary a few months ago, and that owner brought out automatics that day. We shot automatics in a gun range. I said, how can you do that? He said, you know what? Alberta, with our own CFO, grants us exemptions to do this legally. I benefited that day from additional freedom for firearms owners. I would absolutely repatriate the licensing function, the transfer function, that administrative function needs to be conducted here in Alberta. We can do it. It's within our purview, and we will then create and set a course for firearms owners in Alberta to transfer, buy, and sell guns legally and more expeditiously.
Mr. Jean.
I've had a restricted license for 35 years. I'm an avid hunter. I know that firearms are extremely important, and so is safety. And the balance, of course, is Section 91 and 92. I keep coming back to it because in order to do what we want, we have to open up the Constitution. Section 91, of course, deals with safety of the public. Section 92, of course, deals with personal property. What we need to do is pass a personal property law that deals with this particular item, ownership, in order to get the Supreme Court to make a decision on it. If we don't do that, if we don't open the Constitution, we're going to keep coming back to the same thing over and over and over again. In fact, what I would say to you right now is this, is that we can do that and we can pass it and we can get the Supreme Court of Canada to decide where safety is and where personal property is. But more than that, during that process, we have to make sure that the Chief Firearms Officer slows everything down. And I don't usually suggest that's the way to do it, but Mr. Taves is right. We need to slow it down, take over the administrative process, and just stop the federal government coming in. Thank you.
Remember, freedom, safety, responsibility. Canada's National Firearms Association.